Have you ever wondered what happens when a perfect life shatters in public? Logan Vale had it all. A billion-dollar empire, a stunning home, and a beautiful, pregnant wife. Nora Vale. He was the king of his world, and she was his queen. But behind the gilded doors of their mansion, a devastating secret was festering. What happens when the king invites his mistress to dinner, not knowing his pregnant queen is about to walk in? This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a story of humiliation, of a woman's breaking point, and the earth-shattering moment a single glass of spilled wine can bring a powerful man to his knees. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. We'd love to know. And if powerful stories move you, hit subscribe and turn on the bell. Let's dive in. The silence in their cavernous home was Nora's first clue. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a weighted one, thick with unspoken words and the ghosts of conversations that never happened. It clung to the marble floors of the foyer, slithered up the grand, sweeping staircase, and pooled in the dark corners of the rooms she no longer felt belonged to her. Nora Vale, 6 months pregnant and perpetually exhausted, felt more like a curator of a museum than the lady of the house. The house, a modernist marvel of glass and steel perched atop the Hollywood Hills, was Logan's masterpiece. He called it the Vale Jewel, a testament to his success, his vision, his unyielding will. To Nora, it felt like a beautiful, transparent prison, where every move was observable, yet her own heart was invisible. Logan Vale was a man forged in the crucible of Wall Street and refined in the tech boom of Silicon Valley. He was sharp, decisive, and possessed a charisma that could bend reality to his liking. When he looked at you, you felt like the only person in the universe. Nora had basked in that gaze for 5 years, believing it was a sun she could orbit forever. Now she knew it was more like a spotlight, and it could be switched off at a moment's notice. The pregnancy, which should have been their shared joy, had become another one of Logan's projects. He'd hired the best obstetrician in Los Angeles, a nutritionist who sent prepackaged meals in sterile containers, and a designer to create a nursery that looked more like a minimalist art installation than a room for a baby. He managed the pregnancy, but he didn't share in it. He never touched her belly unless she guided his hand. And when he did, his touch was distant, his eyes already on the stock market ticker flashing across his phone. Her suspicions had started as a whisper, a faint unease she couldn't quite name. It was in the late-night board meetings that left his shirt smelling of a perfume that wasn't hers, a cloying, expensive scent, something with notes of jasmine and audacity. It was in the second phone, the sleek, anonymous burner he called his international line, that would buzz at odd hours. When she'd once asked who was calling so late, he'd smiled that disarming smile and said, "That's the price of being a global player, darling. The world never sleeps, but the world," Nora was beginning to realize, had a name, and she suspected that name was Lena. Lena Hart was a name that dripped from the society pages like honey. An art gallery owner with a pedigree as impressive as her portfolio, she was everything Nora was not. Where Nora was quiet, Lena was loud. Where Nora preferred the soft comfort of a cashmere sweater, Lena was always sheathed in something bold and unforgiving. Leather, silk, a slash of crimson lipstick her signature weapon. She was a part of Logan's world in a way Nora had never been. Nora was the beautiful, serene wife, the perfect accessory for galas and charity balls. Lena was his intellectual equal, his sparring partner, a reflection of his own ruthless ambition. Nora had seen them together once, months ago, at a fundraiser. She'd been standing by the bar, feeling whale-like in her couture gown, when she saw Logan leaning in close to Lena. He wasn't just talking. He was consuming her with his eyes, his hand resting on the small of her back, with a familiarity that sent a shard of ice through Nora's heart. Lena had laughed, a throaty, confident sound that cut through the polite chatter of the room. and placed her hand on his chest. It was a gesture of ownership. A brand. When Nora had confronted him later that night, her voice trembling, he had deployed his most potent weapon: gaslighting. "Lena." "Darling, don't be ridiculous," he'd said, loosening his tie as if her accusation was a minor annoyance. "She's a business associate, a very important one. Are you going to start getting jealous of every woman I speak to? It's not a good look, Nora, especially not now. The stress isn't good for the baby." The baby. It was always the baby. Her condition was no longer a source of intimacy, but a shield he used to deflect, to control, to silence her. He made her feel as if her hormones were the problem, that her intuition was just a symptom of a hysterical pregnancy. She had started to doubt her own sanity, to believe that maybe she was just being paranoid. But the signs kept coming, like a slow, toxic leak. A credit card statement she wasn't meant to see, with a charge for a diamond bracelet from a boutique she'd never been to. A hushed, angry phone call she overheard from the hallway, Logan's voice a low snarl. "I told you to be patient. You can't just show up like that." Tonight was supposed to be different. Logan had announced it over breakfast without looking up from his tablet. "I'm taking you to dinner tonight. L'Orangerie. Just the two of us." L'Orangerie was their place. It was where he had proposed, on a terrace dripping with bougainvillea, the city lights twinkling below like a fallen constellation. It was where they went for anniversaries, for celebrations. It was a place of memories, a sanctuary. The suggestion felt like an olive branch, a promise to reconnect. A flicker of hope ignited within her. Maybe she had been wrong. Maybe the stress of his latest merger had just made him distant. She spent the afternoon trying to recapture the woman he had fallen in love with. She had a long bath, the scent of lavender filling the enormous marble bathroom. She chose a dress with care, a deep sapphire silk that draped elegantly over her baby bump, making her feel graceful rather than cumbersome. She styled her blonde hair in soft waves and applied her makeup with a hand that was surprisingly steady. As she looked at her reflection, she saw a glimmer of the old Nora, the woman who was confident, loved, and secure. Logan was waiting for her downstairs, a glass of whiskey in hand. He looked up as she descended the stairs, and for a moment, his eyes held that old, familiar warmth. "You look breathtaking," he said, his voice a low purr. He kissed her, a brief, passionless press of lips. "Ready to go?" The drive down the winding canyon roads was quiet, but this time it was a comfortable silence. Nora allowed herself to relax, to believe. She rested a hand on her belly, where the baby was kicking softly, a secret conversation between the two of them. She watched Logan's handsome profile, the strong line of his jaw illuminated by the passing streetlights, and thought, "We can fix this. We have to." L'Orangerie was as magical as she remembered. The maître d', a stately man named Jean-Luc, greeted them with a familiar smile. "Monsieur and Madame Val, a pleasure. Your usual table is ready." Their table was in a secluded alcove, surrounded by fragrant orange trees and lit by the soft glow of candles. It was perfect. Logan was attentive, pulling out her chair, ordering her a sparkling water with a twist of lime without even asking. He talked about his day. But for once, he wasn't just boasting about his victories. He asked about her, about the baby, about her plans for the nursery. He seemed present, engaged. "I'm sorry I've been so distracted lately, Nora," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. His thumb stroked her knuckles. "This merger has been a beast, but it's almost done. Then I'm all yours." "All yours," he repeated, his eyes meeting hers. Nora's heart swelled with relief. It was going to be okay. She squeezed his hand, a tear of gratitude pricking her eye. "I've missed you, Logan. I've missed you too," he whispered. The appetizers arrived, a delicate dance of flavors on a porcelain plate. The conversation flowed. They laughed. It felt like old times, like before the silence had moved in. Nora felt the tight knot of anxiety in her chest finally begin to loosen. It was as the waiter was clearing their plates that the world tilted on its axis. "Logan, darling, I thought that was you." The voice was unmistakable, throaty, confident, and dripping with a proprietary familiarity. Nora's head snapped up. Standing by their table, a vision in a fire engine red dress that clung to her like a second skin, was Lena Hart. She wasn't looking at Nora. Her eyes, a startling shade of emerald green, were locked on Logan. A wide, predatory smile played on her crimson lips. Nora's blood ran cold. This was no coincidence. The world didn't shrink this conveniently, not even in a city as incestuous as Los Angeles. Logan's reaction was a study in controlled panic. A flicker of shock, quickly masked by a cool, charming smile. He dropped Nora's hand as if it were hot coal. "Lena, what a surprise," he said, his voice a little too loud, a little too jovial. He stood up, a perfect gentleman. "I was just having a drink at the bar and saw you two tucked away back here." Lena purred, her gaze finally sliding over to Nora. It wasn't a glance. It was an assessment, a dismissal. Her eyes lingered for a fraction of a second on Nora's swollen belly, and a flicker of something, triumph, pity, crossed her face. "You must be Nora. Logan has told me so little about you." The insult was as sharp and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. "So little about you." As if she were a footnote in her own husband's life, Nora felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at Logan, pleading with her eyes for him to say something, to fix this, to draw a line in the sand. Tell her to leave. Tell her she's mistaken. Tell her who I am. But Logan just stood there, trapped between his wife and his mistress, his charming smile frozen on his face. "Nora, this is Lena Hart, a colleague. Colleague." The word was a lie, a pathetic, flimsy shield. Lena extended a perfectly manicured hand, her diamond bracelet, the one from the credit card statement, flashing under the candlelight. "A pleasure to finally meet you," she said, her voice laced with a sweetness that was more poisonous than venom. Nora couldn't bring herself to take the offered hand. Her own hands were trembling in her lap. She felt the baby give a sharp, sudden kick, as if it, too, could sense the poison in the air. "Why don't you join us?" Logan said suddenly, the words tumbling out of his mouth before he could stop them. It was a fatal miscalculation, a desperate attempt to normalize an impossible situation. He was trying to manage it, to control the narrative, just as he managed everything else. Lena's smile widened. "I'd love to. I was just about to have dinner myself." Without waiting for a response from Nora, she gracefully slid into the booth, right next to Logan, her thigh pressing against his. The intimate space of their alcove, their sanctuary, had been invaded. The air grew thick, suffocating. Nora stared at her husband, a silent scream trapped in her throat. He wouldn't meet her eyes. He was looking at the wine list, his face a mask of feigned nonchalance. He had not only failed to protect her, he had actively invited the enemy into their camp. He had sat his mistress down at their table, in their restaurant, and called her a colleague. The hope that had flickered to life within her just moments before was brutally extinguished. In its place, a cold, hard certainty began to form. This wasn't just a suspicion anymore. This was a declaration of war. And she was sitting on the wrong side of the battlefield. The waiter returned, his professional smile unwavering, oblivious to the emotional carnage unfolding in the candlelit alcove. "Are we ready to order another bottle of wine, monsieur?" "Absolutely!" Logan boomed, seizing the distraction. He was a man adrift, and the wine list was his life raft. "Let's get the Mistress, a celebration." Nora stared at him, aghast. The Petru was their wine, The wine he had ordered the night he proposed. It cost more than most people's monthly rent. To order it now, with her here, was not just an insult. It was a desecration. A celebration. "What are we celebrating, darling?" Lena asked, leaning in closer to Logan, her voice a seductive whisper that was meant for Nora to hear. She ran a single, red-nailed finger down the lapel of his jacket. Logan cleared his throat, finally daring a glance at Nora. His eyes were pleading, desperate. "Play along, please, just play along." But Nora's face was a mask of stone. The ability to play along, to be the good, quiet wife, had been stripped from her. "The merger," Logan said, his voice strained. "It's finally complete. A huge win for the company." "Oh, I know all about the merger," Lena said, her gaze sliding to Nora, a smug, knowing look in her eyes. "Logan and I pulled many a late night getting that deal across the finish line, didn't we, Elle?" Elle. The casual intimacy of the nickname was another twist of the knife. Nora felt a wave of nausea so intense she had to grip the edge of the table. The prepackaged meal from the nutritionist churned in her stomach. She could feel the color draining from her face, the room starting to spin. The sommelier arrived with the bottle of Petrus, presenting it to Logan with the reverence reserved for a holy relic. The ritual of it all, the careful uncorking, the splash of deep ruby liquid into a glass for Logan to taste, felt like a grotesque parody. Logan swirled the wine, sniffed it, and nodded his approval, a king presiding over a court that was crumbling around him. "Excellent," he declared. The sommelier poured 2 glasses, one for Logan, one for Lena. He then turned to Nora, a bottle of sparkling water in hand. "And for Madame? She'll have a glass of the wine," Lena said, her voice sharp and commanding. She waved a dismissive hand at Nora's belly. "Oh, come on. A little sip won't hurt the... European women do it all the time. You Americans are so puritanical." The sheer audacity of it stole Nora's breath. This woman, this stranger who was sleeping with her husband, was now dictating what she should and should not drink during her pregnancy. She was trying to paint Nora as a hysterical, overprotective mother-to-be, a cliché. Nora looked to Logan, expecting, praying for him to intervene. This was his chance. A simple, "No, Nora isn't drinking," would suffice. It would be a small gesture, but it would be something. It would be a sign that he still saw her, that she still mattered. Logan hesitated. He looked from Lena's challenging smirk to Nora's pale, desperate face. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He was paralyzed, a coward caught in the crossfire. His silence was his answer. It was the most damning answer of all. In that moment, something inside Nora snapped. It wasn't a loud, violent break, but a quiet, seismic fracture. The years of being managed, of being silenced, of having her feelings dismissed as hormonal or irrational, coalesced into a single point of unbearable pressure. The woman who had spent the afternoon trying to be graceful and beautiful was gone. The woman who had hoped for reconciliation was gone. All that was left was a raw, primal instinct for self-preservation. She had to get out. She couldn't breathe. The jasmine and audacity of Lena's perfume was choking her. The weight of Logan's betrayal was crushing her. She pushed her chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the stone floor. The sound was jarring in the hushed, elegant restaurant. Both Logan and Lena turned to look at her. "I'm not feeling well," Nora said, her voice a low, trembling whisper. It was the only sound she could manage. "I need some air." She stood up, her body unsteady. Her hand, clumsy and uncoordinated, reached for her purse on the table. And in that single, fumbling movement, her arm brushed against the slender stem of Lena's wine glass. Time seemed to slow down. She saw the glass wobble, a precarious dance on the edge of the white linen tablecloth. She saw the deep red liquid, the sacred celebratory Petrus, slosh against the crystal. And then, with a horrifying, inevitable grace, it tipped. The entire glass of wine, a river of crimson, cascaded directly onto the lap of Logan's pristine, cream-colored Tom Ford suit. It was a spectacular disaster. The wine soaked into the expensive fabric instantly, a dark, spreading stain of shame and accusation. It looked like a wound, a stigmata. A collective gasp went through the alcove. For a heartbeat, there was absolute silence. The only sound was the drip, drip, drip of the wine falling from the hem of Logan's jacket onto the floor. Lena was the first to react, letting out a theatrical shriek. "Oh my God, Logan, your suit!" Logan leaped to his feet, staring down at his ruined trousers in disbelief. His face, which had been a mask of panicked charm, was now contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. The public humiliation was more than he could bear. He was Logan Vale. Things like this didn't happen to him. He was the one who spilled things, who made messes that other people cleaned up. He looked up at Nora, and the look in his eyes was terrifying. The mask was gone. The charm was gone. All that was left was a cold, reptilian rage. He saw not his pregnant wife, but the agent of his public disgrace. "What the hell did you just do?" he hissed, his voice low and venomous, so only she could hear. But Nora barely heard him. She was staring at the stain, at the beautiful, ugly, perfect mess she had made. It wasn't an accident. She knew that in the deepest part of her fractured soul. It was a release. It was a scream made visible. It was 5 years of silent frustration, of suspicion, of being made to feel small and crazy, all erupting in a single, clumsy, glorious act of defiance. She didn't apologize. She didn't cry. She simply looked at Logan, at the ugly red stain blooming across his lap. And then she looked at Lena, whose face was a mixture of shock and fury. And then Nora turned and walked away. She didn't run. She walked, her head held high, her hand resting protectively on her belly. She walked past the stunned waiters, past the curious glances of the other diners, past Jean-Luc, whose professional composure had finally cracked. She walked out of the fragrant, magical restaurant, their sanctuary, and into the cool, indifferent night air. She didn't look back. She knew what she would see. She would see her husband, the great Logan Vale, standing there humiliated, covered in the wine he had chosen to celebrate his betrayal. She would see his kingdom. For one brief, shining moment, in utter disarray. And for the first time in a very long time, Nora Vale felt like she could breathe again. The drive home was a blur. Nora didn't remember getting into her car or navigating the winding canyon roads. She drove on autopilot, her mind a maelstrom of shock, adrenaline, and a terrifying, exhilarating sense of freedom. The silence in the car was her own, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence of her marriage. It was a clean slate. When she walked back into the glass house, it no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a stage, and the final act had just been performed. She went straight upstairs, not to their shared master suite, but to one of the guest rooms at the far end of the house. It was a sterile, impersonal space, but it was hers. She locked the door, a gesture she hadn't made in 5 years, and the simple click of the lock was the most satisfying sound she had ever heard. She sank onto the bed, her body trembling with the aftershocks of the confrontation. The baby was quiet now, as if sensing the storm had passed. Nora wrapped her arms around her belly, a primal, protective gesture. "It's just you and me now," she whispered into the empty room. "It's just you and me." She didn't cry. The tears were lodged somewhere deep inside, frozen by a cold, hard anger. She had been pushed and pushed and pushed, and tonight she had finally pushed back. The image of the red wine blooming across Logan's perfect suit was seared into her mind. It was a brand of her own, a mark of her pain. An hour later, she heard his car screech into the driveway. She heard the front door slam with a force that seemed to shake the very foundations of the glass house. She heard his heavy, angry footsteps on the marble floor below. "Nora!" His voice was a roar, echoing through the empty mansion. It was the voice he used to eviscerate underlings in the boardroom, a voice of pure, unchecked power. "Where the hell are you?" She heard him storm up the stairs. He tried the handle of their master bedroom, then slammed the door open when he found it empty. "Nora!" His footsteps grew closer, stopping outside her locked door. He rattled the handle, a violent, impatient sound. "Open this door. Right now." Nora stayed silent, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was afraid, but it was a different kind of fear than she had ever known. It wasn't the fear of a meek wife cowering from her husband's displeasure. It was the fear of a cornered animal that had just discovered it had claws. "Nora, I am not going to say it again!" he bellowed, his fist pounding against the wood. "You embarrassed me! You humiliated me in front of everyone, in front of Lena! Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I know exactly what I've done," she thought. "I've finally shown you who I am." His rage was not about a ruined suit. It was about his loss of control. He had orchestrated the evening, confident he could manage both women, keeping them in their separate, designated boxes. He had underestimated her. He had assumed her silence was weakness. Her compliance was contentment. He had never imagined she was capable of such a messy, public, and beautifully defiant act. His pounding continued for another minute, a furious, impotent rhythm. Then silence. She heard him muttering, cursing. She heard him stomp back down the stairs. A few minutes later, she heard the roar of his sports car as he tore out of the driveway and back into the night. He was running back to Lena, she knew. Back to the woman who understood his world, who wouldn't challenge him, who would soothe his bruised ego and tell him how right he was, how crazy his pregnant wife had become. Left in the echoing silence, Nora finally allowed herself to break. The frozen tears thawed, and she began to sob. Not the quiet, stifled sobs of a victim, but the great, shuddering, cleansing sobs of a survivor. She cried for the man she thought she had married, for the love she thought they had shared. She cried for the baby who would be born into this broken home, and she cried for herself, for the years she had lost, for the woman she had allowed herself to become. Meanwhile, Logan was speeding down the freeway, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The rage was a physical thing, a hot, bitter bile in his throat. He wasn't just angry, he was incandescent with a fury born of pure narcissism. How dare she? How dare she make a scene? He drove straight to Lena's gallery in Beverly Hills. The lights were on in the loft apartment above. He used his own key to let himself in. He found her in the living room, pouring 2 glasses of brandy. She was wearing a silk robe, the red dress discarded on a chair. She looked up as he entered, her expression a careful mixture of sympathy and concern. "Elle, you poor thing," she said, her voice a velvet balm. She handed him a glass. "I can't believe she did that. She's completely unhinged." Logan took the brandy and downed it in one gulp, the fire of it doing little to quell the fire in his gut. "Unhinged doesn't even begin to describe it. She's lost her mind." "It's the pregnancy, darling," Lena said, stroking his arm. "It makes some women so emotional, unpredictable. You can't blame yourself." But he did blame himself. Not for the affair, not for the lies, but for his own miscalculation. He had thought he could have it all. The perfect, respectable wife and the exciting, intelligent mistress. He had thought he was smart enough to keep his 2 worlds from colliding. Tonight had been a catastrophic failure of management, and Logan Vale did not fail. "She did it on purpose," he snarled, pacing the room like a caged tiger. "I saw it in her eyes. She wanted to humiliate me." "Of course she did," Lena agreed, her voice smooth and persuasive. "She's jealous. She knows she can't compete with me, with us. She's a small provincial woman, and she's terrified of losing you." This was a desperate, pathetic cry for attention. Every word she spoke was designed to soothe his ego, to reinforce his narrative. She was recasting the evening's events, painting Nora as the villain, the hysterical shrew, and him as the long-suffering husband. It was exactly what he wanted to hear. "What are you going to do?" Lena asked, her hand moving from his arm to his chest. Logan looked at her beautiful, clever face. She was his equal. She was a reflection of his own ambition. She would never embarrass him like that. She was part of the life he wanted, the life he deserved. Nora, with her quiet judgments and her inconvenient pregnancy, was an anchor, holding him back. "I'm going to end it," he said, the decision crystallizing in his mind, cold and hard as a diamond. "I'm done." Lena's smile was slow, triumphant. "I think that's a very wise decision," she said, her lips finding his. As Logan lost himself in Lena's embrace, trying to erase the stain of his humiliation, he was oblivious to the profound shift that had occurred. He thought he was taking back control. He thought he was cutting a liability from his portfolio. He couldn't comprehend that the woman he was discarding had just found a strength he never knew she possessed. He thought he was winning, but in reality, he had just lost everything that truly mattered. The glass house he had built so carefully was about to shatter, and he was the one who had thrown the first stone. The days that followed were a war of attrition fought by lawyers. Logan, true to his nature, went on the offensive. He had Nora served with divorce papers the very next day. The documents were delivered by a cold-faced courier to the glass house, a thick, intimidating manila envelope that felt like a bomb. The terms were brutal. Logan was leveraging a prenuptial agreement that Nora had signed in a haze of love and trust 5 years ago. It was an ironclad document designed to protect his burgeoning empire, leaving her with a pittance, a fraction of what she was entitled to after 5 years of marriage. He was trying to starve her out, to force her into a quick, quiet surrender. He offered a settlement that was generous by normal standards, but insulting given his vast wealth. It came with a condition, a non-disclosure agreement so restrictive it would essentially erase her from his history. She would be a ghost. His strategy was clear: to paint her as the unstable, irrational party. His lawyer, a shark in a bespoke suit named Owen Black, leaked carefully curated stories to the gossip columns. They hinted at a troubled marriage, at Nora's erratic behavior during the pregnancy. The wine incident was spun into a tale of a hysterical outburst, a public meltdown. They were trying to discredit her, to isolate her. For the first week, Nora felt like she was drowning. The legal jargon, the veiled threats, the public character assassination. It was an overwhelming assault. She stayed locked in the guest room, the house a constant humming reminder of Logan's power. She felt small, helpless, a pawn in a game she didn't know how to play. The turning point came not from a lawyer, but from her sister, Maya. Maya was a social worker in Chicago, a woman grounded in a reality a million miles away from the gilded cage of Los Angeles. When Nora finally found the courage to call her, her voice cracking as she recounted the story, Maya didn't offer pity. She offered fury. "That son of a bitch," Maya said, her voice a righteous roar over the phone. "He thinks he can just buy your silence? He thinks he can throw money at you and make you disappear? Oh, hell no. We are not letting that happen." The next day, Maya was on a plane. She arrived at the glass house like a force of nature, her sensible shoes and determined expression a stark contrast to the sterile opulence of the place. She took one look at her pale, trembling sister, and her first act was to march into the kitchen, past the nutritionist-approved meals, and make a pot of coffee and a plate of scrambled eggs. "First you eat," she commanded. "Then we fight." Maya was the anchor Nora needed. She helped her find a lawyer, not a slick corporate shark like Owen Black, but a woman named Ava Reed, a renowned family law attorney known for her tenacity and her refusal to be intimidated by wealth. Ava was a small, formidable woman with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. In their first meeting, she listened to Nora's entire story without interruption. She read Logan's proposed settlement, her expression hardening with each page. "This isn't a settlement," Ava said, her voice calm but laced with steel. "This is an insult. He's trying to bully you. He's counting on you being too scared and too tired to fight back. He's made a mistake." For the first time, a flicker of hope ignited in Nora. With Maya by her side and Ava as her champion, she no longer felt alone. She was part of a team. The first step was to leave the glass house. It was Logan's territory, a psychological battlefield where she was at a constant disadvantage. Maya helped her pack. They didn't take the designer clothes or the expensive jewelry. They packed her personal belongings, the sentimental things that Logan had always dismissed as clutter. Her books, her photographs, a box of letters from her grandmother. They were reclaiming her identity, piece by piece. She found a small, furnished bungalow in Santa Monica, a few blocks from the beach. It was modest, a world away from the palatial emptiness of the Hollywood Hills, but it was filled with light and the sound of the ocean. For the first time in months, Nora felt like she had a home. As the legal battle raged on, Nora focused on her health and the baby. She fired the nutritionist and the celebrity obstetrician. She found a local midwife, a warm, down-to-earth woman who talked to her about birth plans and breathing exercises, not just risk factors and liability. She started walking on the beach every morning, the salt spray on her face feeling like a baptism. She was slowly, painfully, coming back to herself. Meanwhile, Logan's world was not as perfect as he had imagined. His victory in securing the merger felt hollow. The public nature of the divorce was a blemish on his carefully crafted image. His board of directors, a group of old-money conservatives, were not impressed by the gossip column headlines. They valued stability, discretion. A messy public divorce from a pregnant wife was not discreet. Lena, too, was not the perfect partner he had envisioned. Now that she had won, a certain hardness had emerged. She was possessive, demanding. She was constantly pushing for them to make their relationship public, to be seen at all the right places. She was trying to cement her position as the new Mrs. Vale. But Logan found himself hesitating. The victory felt tainted. He started thinking about Nora, not the hysterical woman from the restaurant, but the woman he had first fallen in love with. He remembered her quiet intelligence, her gentle laugh, the way she could listen for hours without feeling the need to talk about herself. He had mistaken her serenity for a lack of ambition, her kindness for weakness. He was beginning to see that her strength was just of a different kind, a quiet, resilient strength that he had tried and failed to break. The hidden motive for his cruelty, he was forced to admit in the lonely hours of the night, was fear. He had been terrified of the baby, of the profound, irreversible change it represented. The baby was not something he could control, not a deal he could manage. It was a lifetime of responsibility, of vulnerability. It required a part of himself he had long ago buried, his heart. Lena was safe. She was all sharp edges and ambition, a mirror of himself. She would never ask for his heart, only for his status and his wealth. Nora, and the baby she carried, asked for everything. His redemption began not with a grand gesture, but with a small, private act of contrition. He was in his office late one night, unable to sleep, when he came across a file for a charitable foundation he had set up for tax purposes and then promptly forgotten. It was a foundation for underprivileged children. On a sudden impulse, he called his CFO and authorized a massive, anonymous donation, enough to fund the charity for the next decade. It was the first thing he had done in years that wasn't for his own gain, and it felt good. It was a flicker of light in the darkness of his own making. The legal battle came to a head not in a courtroom, but in a sterile conference room. Logan and Owen Black sat on one side of a long mahogany table. Nora, Ava, and Maya sat on the other. Nora was now 8 months pregnant, her belly a proud, defiant statement. She was no longer the pale, trembling woman from the restaurant. She was calm, composed, her gaze steady. Logan had come prepared for a fight, for a negotiation. He was ready to increase the settlement, to throw more money at the problem until it went away. But Ava Reed didn't want to talk about money. She slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was a photograph. A grainy paparazzi photo, but the image was clear. It was Logan and Lena, kissing on the terrace of a hotel in Paris. The date stamp on the photo was from 6 months ago, the day of their 5th wedding anniversary, a day Logan had claimed to be in a critical negotiation in Zurich. Logan's blood ran cold. He had been so careful. How had they gotten it? "My client is not interested in your settlement, Mr. Vale," Ava said, her voice quiet but firm. "She is interested in a fair and equitable dissolution of the marriage. The prenuptial agreement has an infidelity clause, a clause which you seem to have forgotten. This photograph, along with sworn affidavits from the hotel staff, makes that clause enforceable. We are prepared to take this to trial. We will subpoena your business partners, your friends, and of course, Ms. Hart. I wonder how your conservative board of directors will feel about a public trial detailing your adultery." It was a checkmate. A public trial was the one thing Logan could not afford. It would be a circus, a disaster for his company's image. He was trapped. He looked across the table at Nora. He expected to see triumph in her eyes, a smug satisfaction. But he saw none. She just looked sad. Sad for him. Sad for them. Sad for the mess they had made. In that moment, he finally understood. This wasn't about revenge for her. It was about justice. It was about dignity. He looked at his lawyer, who gave a barely perceptible shake of his head. They were beaten. "Draw up a new agreement," Logan said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Give her whatever she wants." He stood up, his legs unsteady, and walked out of the room without looking back. He had come to the meeting a king, expecting to dictate the terms of surrender. He left a broken man, stripped of his power, his arrogance, and his pride. The reckoning had come, and it was far more costly than he had ever imagined. The divorce was finalized quietly a few weeks later. Nora, on Ava's advice, had not been greedy. She didn't want to be tied to Logan's empire for the rest of her life. She took a settlement that was fair, enough to ensure that she and her child would be secure, but not so much that it felt like blood money. Her victory was not in the amount, but in the principle. She had refused to be silenced, refused to be erased. The most important clause in the agreement had nothing to do with money. It was a custody agreement. Logan had initially wanted to fight for joint custody, another power play, another attempt to control her life through their child. But in the end, faced with the evidence of his infidelity and the quiet, unyielding strength Nora now possessed, he had conceded. She would have sole physical custody. He would have visitation rights, but they would be at her discretion. He had lost the right to make demands. 2 weeks after the papers were signed, Nora went into labor. It was a long and difficult birth, but Maya was by her side the entire time, holding her hand, breathing with her. And when she finally held her daughter for the first time, a tiny, perfect creature with a tuft of dark hair and her father's startlingly blue eyes, Nora felt a love so fierce and so profound it eclipsed everything else. She named her Kai. It was a name that felt like a prayer, a promise. Life in the Santa Monica bungalow was a world away from the glass house. It was messy, Noisy and filled with love, Maya stayed for the first 2 months, a godsend of practicality and unwavering support. They navigated the sleepless nights and the endless cycle of feeding and changing together. Nora, who had once felt like a curator in a museum, was now fully engaged in the beautiful, chaotic art of motherhood. She discovered a strength and a resilience she never knew she had. She was no longer Logan Vale's wife. She was Kai's mother. It was the most powerful title she had ever held. Logan, meanwhile, was adrift. His relationship with Lena had imploded shortly after the divorce. The thrill of the affair had been in the secrecy, the danger. Once they were a legitimate couple, the reality was far less glamorous. Their ambition, which had once been a source of attraction, now made them competitors. They clashed constantly, their egos too large to coexist in the same space. The relationship ended as it had begun, with a dramatic, bitter fight in a public place. He was alone, rattling around in the silent, empty glass house. The house, once a symbol of his success, now felt like a monument to his failure. Every gleaming surface reflected his solitude. He had everything he had ever wanted, the money, the power, the empire, but he had never felt more empty. He thought about Kai. He had seen the pictures Nora had sent him, as per their agreement. A tiny, swaddled bundle, a small, sleeping face. He felt a pull, a yearning that was completely foreign to him. It was not a desire for ownership or control. It was something softer, something more terrifying. It was love. He knew he had no right to be in her life. He had abdicated that right when he had chosen his ego over his family. But the thought of his daughter growing up without knowing him, of her thinking of him only as the villain in her mother's story, was an agony he couldn't bear. He had to try, not with a grand gesture, not with an expensive gift, but with something real. He had to earn his redemption. His first step was to sell the glass house. He couldn't heal in a place that was so full of ghosts. He sold it to a tech billionaire from another country and never looked back. He bought a smaller, more modest house in a quiet neighborhood, a place with a garden. His second step was to see a therapist. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. For a man who had built his life on a foundation of unshakable confidence, admitting he needed help felt like a catastrophic failure. But he went, week after week, and slowly, painfully, began to dismantle the fortress he had built around his heart. He talked about his own father, a cold, demanding man who had taught him that love was conditional, that emotion was weakness. He talked about his fear of failure, his addiction to control. He began to understand the man he had become. And for the first time, he wanted to be someone different. 6 months after Kai was born, he called Nora. His heart was pounding, his palms sweating. He had faced down hostile takeovers and federal regulators with less fear than he felt making this phone call. "Nora," he said when she answered. His voice was quiet, stripped of its usual arrogance. I was wondering if I could see her. Kai, I'll come to you. Whatever time is good. Just for a few minutes." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Nora was wary. She had built a safe, peaceful world for her and her daughter, and she was terrified of letting him disrupt it. But she heard something in his voice she had never heard before. Humility. "Okay, Logan," she said, her voice cautious. "Saturday, at the park by the beach, 2 o'clock. He arrived early, clutching a small, stuffed bear. He saw them from a distance. Nora was sitting on a blanket, and Kai was on her lap, batting at a toy. Nora looked happy. Genuinely happy. The sight of it was a punch to the gut, a painful reminder of what he had thrown away. He approached them slowly, like a man approaching a timid animal he didn't want to scare away. He sat down on the edge of the blanket, keeping his distance. "Hi," he said softly. "Hi, Logan," Nora replied. Her voice was neutral, polite. He looked at his daughter. She was beautiful. She had his eyes, but she had her mother's smile. He felt a wave of love so overwhelming it brought tears to his eyes. He quickly blinked them away, embarrassed. He held out the stuffed bear. I brought this for her." Nora took it and gave it to Kai, who immediately tried to put its ear in her mouth. A small smile touched Nora's lips. They sat in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the gulls crying overhead and the distant crash of the waves. "I'm sorry, Nora," Logan said finally, the words raw and difficult. "For everything. Not just for Lena. For the way I treated you. For the man I was. You didn't deserve any of it. I was a coward. And I was a fool." Nora looked at him. Really looked at him. For the first time that day. She saw the changes in him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a deep, profound sadness. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by simple jeans and a sweater. He looked smaller, more human. She knew that one apology could not erase years of pain. She knew that forgiveness was a long and complicated road. But she also knew that the man sitting in front of her was not the same man who had humiliated her in that restaurant. He was trying. "Thank you for saying that, Logan," she said quietly. "It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't absolution. But it was a start. It was a single, fragile bridge across a vast canyon of hurt." He stayed for another hour. He didn't try to hold Kai. Didn't push for more than Nora was willing to give. He just watched her, his heart aching with a mixture of love and regret. When it was time to go, he stood up and looked at Nora. Can I do this again?" he asked, his voice full of a vulnerability she had never seen in him. Nora looked down at her daughter, who was now sleeping peacefully in her arms. Kai deserved to know her father, but she deserved to know the best version of him. Perhaps this man, this broken, trying man, could become that version. "We'll see, Logan," she said. "One day at a time." It was all he could ask for. He nodded, gave them one last lingering look, and walked away. He knew his path to redemption would be long. He had shattered his family, his marriage, and himself. But as he walked away from the beach, he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. It wasn't the thrill of a victory or the satisfaction of a successful deal. It was something much quieter, much more profound. It was hope. Nora watched him go, a complex mixture of emotions swirling within her. The glass house had been shattered, but in the breaking, the light had finally gotten in. Her future was no longer a gilded cage, but an open sky. And for her, and for Kai, it was a sky full of possibilities. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. That single, shattering moment in the restaurant was not the end of Nora's story. It was the beginning. It was the catalyst for a journey of incredible strength, of finding her voice, and of rebuilding a life on her own terms. Logan, the man who had everything, had to lose it all to finally find himself. Their story is a powerful reminder that our deepest wounds can sometimes lead to our greatest transformations. If their emotional journey from betrayal to redemption moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who loves a story about the resilience of the human heart. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more real-life dramas and compelling stories. What did you think of Nora's choice in the end? Let us know in the comments below.